Young people are in car crashes for many reasons: not paying attention, speed, intoxication, or bad luck. For these young people, the automobile is the danger zone. When you add alcohol, any place can be deadly. Drunk or distracted drivers kill many innocent people. Some kill themselves, their friends, or others. Many begin drinking as early as middle school, while others start in high school. Some get a second chance and don't take it, leading to tragedy. Young people don't think about getting killed or killing others while drinking. Everybody drinks and nobody thinks it will happen to them. It's just a few beers. It's just a few miles.
The automobile is the danger zone. A fatality of your teenager is a parent's worst nightmare. Why do they die? What are the causes? It could be extreme driving, distracted driving, not wearing seatbelts, or impairment.
I started drinking probably here and there, maybe when I was 16. And it wasn't a lot. You know, it would be a few friends, maybe, and we'd sneak a beer or something. And then it just progressively got more and more over the years.
Alcohol played a huge role in freshman year, actually in all years of college. That was, you know, you wanted to be invited to the parties as a freshman, you wanted to be let in the door. As a girl, it was much easier to get in, and that's where you did most of your socializing.
Carefree, college, Friday night, it's party, have fun, meet some girls.
It's usually parties every weekend, and everyone would get together, and it'd sometimes be kegs, sometimes bring your own beer, or someone would have a bottle of liquor, and everyone would just hang out, and if you couldn't find a house, we'd go into the cornfield. Everyone usually had an older brother or sister who would get beer for them, so we'd all just hang out and drink. And
one of my friends always knew somebody who was of age, and the person who was of age was supplying.
It happens all the time. I mean, I see it every summer. Graduation parties, you know, weddings, things like that. People just get in a car, get hammered.
I've heard plenty of messages about drinking and driving, and all through high school, even in middle school, and that didn't deter me from drinking and driving. That didn't stop me. I didn't think about those when I got behind the wheel. I was being rather selfish. So I think that helped reinforce the fact that I was, what some people like to believe, a good drunk driver, which there is no such thing as a good drunk driver. But after a few drinks, people feel like they're Superman. They think they can do anything. They feel fine, but they're really not. I felt I was untouchable, indestructible, because nothing bad had happened in the past, that nothing was going to happen because I was too good for that.
After a crash, the survivors have to survive. The parents have to go on. The friends have to cope. Tremendous feelings of guilt, rage, and in some cases, an inability to forgive are the characteristics of the grieving process.
Hobart William Smith College freshmen Rachel and Emily were visiting their friend Katie, who is a freshman at Colgate University. Rachel's away message read, "Visiting Catherine Jeannie for the night. Colgate better be ready. The 3 is back." They were lifelong friends. They graduated high school together. They walked to the downtown bars because they didn't want to drink and drive. Good-natured Kevin was with his friends Chris and Eric. They left for the weekend to visit their friend Rob, a sophomore at Colgate University. After a night of partying at the fraternity, Kevin felt he was too drunk to drive and let Rob drive. However, the designated driver was also drunk. They picked up 4 girls hitchhiking back to the dorms in Kevin's red Jeep. It was a cold, rainy November night. All they had to do was get to the top of the hill.
And grief is a journey that's taken Lauren, Larry, and I down many different roads. We've had a lot of bumps along the way, but we've bonded as a family, and we were always a very close family. There wasn't a time that Lauren and Kevin didn't leave the house. that Larry and I didn't say to them, "I love you," and they would yell back, "I love you too."
When we first moved to Norwich, in Katie's first day at school, at the primary school, she met this black-haired, black-eyed little kid that had broken her arm, and Katie helped her out that first day, and it turned out to be Rachel. Soon after that, Rachel introduced Katie to Emily. So that's where this relationship of these three wonderful girls started, was with that first day at Katie at Gibson Primary School, her first day at school, and moved to Norwich. And from there, that relationship just kept growing, and it would seem wherever one of them were, the other two were always close at hand.
That's when I called the Almeters. And that's the first time I found out, because somebody answered the phone and I said, "What's the matter?" And Betsy got on the phone and she just said, "I'm so sorry." And that's all she could say to me was, "I'm so sorry." And she said Katie was dead. So at that point, I knew, because they did everything together. Had someone just called us, not that it would have changed anything, but, my husband would have been here, my parents would have, at least. It was horrible there. I couldn't get a signal on my cell phone. It was horrible.
At this point, I knew something terrible had happened. And so I have a friend, his name's Jan Papolino, that his sister worked up at Colgate. And so I called him. I said, "Jan, can you call and find out something happened up there?" And he called his sister, and he came right to the house. He said, "Yeah, there was an accident last night, and 4 kids were killed." And right then, I knew Emily was dead. But you always had to see the hope that maybe she isn't.
It took a really long time, I think, for me to grieve what had happened and for me to really realize it, because my parents were thrown into such a turmoil that I was somehow like the steady one, and I was the rock, and I helped do normal day-to-day things, and I, got my mom to, go places or do something with me.
At 7:45, I heard a pounding on the door, and the state trooper was there at the door. And he asked me if I am who I am, and I said yes, and I immediately thought that something had happened to Bob, because he said, "Is your husband home?" And then he asked me if he could come in, and he still didn't tell me what was going on. He wanted me to sit down, and I wouldn't sit down. I think that I knew at some level that if I didn't sit down, he wouldn't tell me what had happened, and then it wouldn't have happened.
We had and still have a wonderful relationship with Kate. Our relationship with Katie now, though, is in her memory and her spirit, however it presents itself to us. So it's not something we want to get over or get through. We want to be able to live next to that emotion. Yes, it's deep, it's painful, but it's rich, and it's powerful. It's grace. It's mystery.
This journey is long for all of us, and unfortunately will never end, because grief doesn't end. When people say, "How do you go on?" I go on because that's what Kevin would want us to do as a family. And life will never, ever be the same for any of us, nor can it be, because part of us is missing, and we'll never get a chance to get that part back. But I would rather have had Kevin for 20 wonderful years than never to have had him at all in my life, because he was such a vibrant, shining presence to his father and I, and most especially his sister.
Simple bad judgment after bad judgment after bad judgment, and had a very catastrophic result for the people involved. Think about this. This is a good example of how catastrophic it can turn out, and use your good judgment and bail out of that situation and get to a safe place.
Tim from Camden High School was a designated driver. However, his friend Jesse wouldn't let him drive. Tim didn't drink, and Tim's mom, Betsy, was behind them on her way to pick Tim up. She was diverted from the crash scene.
He called me from the fast track in Camden, said they were getting gas and that they were headed for Canastota, and I told him I would leave in just a few minutes to come and get him to bring him home for school the next day. And he said okay, and I told him I loved him, and we hung up. A couple of minutes after that, I decided to get up and go out and go get him. I couldn't have been more than 20 minutes behind them. They were coming around the corner, and they kind of hit the guardrails on one side. You could see where they had hit. And they had gone off into the dirt, and when he went to correct, he overcorrected and came right across the lane and more or less head on into the truck that was coming at him. Jesse was driving. Joe was sitting in the middle with Autumn on his lap, and Chris was on the outside with Tim on his lap. And when the trucks collided, the truck they were in went into a spin, and the door had opened, and they more or less all flew out. Chris and Joe landed pretty close together in the ditch. Autumn was further down. Joe was in the middle of the road, and Jesse was on the shoulder of the road. Yes, I've had plenty of rage, and I have wanted to hit people, but I also went, if anything is to come of this, just to save one life, by somebody learning from what happened to my son, his life wouldn't have been wasted. You know, it would give meaning to his life. If somebody thinks twice before getting into a vehicle with somebody else who's been drinking, or overcrowding a cab of a truck when you're only supposed to have 3 and all be seatbelted in. You know, if they just think of these things and it saves just one life, I'll be happy.
At Paul Smith's College in the Adirondacks, an end-of-semester keg party on Saranac Lake led to the drowning of 2 students. Brandon was a star high school athlete at Franklin Academy. He had just finished practice and was returning home with his girlfriend. A corrections officer had too much to drink. The corrections officer worked with Brandon's parents. Chris and Brian were friends who did most everything together. They even worked together. One night after work, they stopped by Copperfield's, a local bar that they knew would serve them, although Chris and Brian were underage. On that cold, dark night on a winding river road, Chris lost control of the car and slammed into a telephone pole. Brian was killed on impact, and Chris, after recovering from his coma, was sentenced and jailed.
As I exited my vehicle and walked up to the vehicle, I observed that it had substantial passenger side damage. The inside was filled with smoke and steam from the result of the accident and the damage caused to the engine and the airbags being deployed. I immediately found that both the front seat passenger and the front seat driver were laying back unconscious. Unable to get into the car by any door, I used my flashlight, shattered the the driver's window, where I gained access into the interior and found that the driver was gasping for air as well as the passenger. I immediately notified for EMS to respond, and within several minutes, I would say, members of the local fire department who were EMS trained arrived on scene and began administering emergency aid to the driver, Christopher Devitt. It was apparent at that time that Mr. Steiner had succumbed to his injuries at the scene. He had extensive injuries, and they concentrated their attention to Mr. Devitt.
We were notified approximately 5 o'clock in the morning. At that moment, in that one moment, everything changed. We had no idea at the time how much everything would change, just realizing the depth of what was going on and being so horrified by this thing, just like screaming to God, please don't take the child. Please don't take my son. We were immediately taken into the emergency intensive care unit and found Chris in a condition that we never would have expected.
When I first saw him, I didn't know how to feel because I just walked into a room, like my dad hesitated to let me go in and see him because he thought it would shock me, and I just walked in there and it was like, I didn't know who he was at the time. He just looked so different because like he had tons of wires attached to him. He was hooked up to a life support machine, I think it was. The side of his head was shaved. He had tubes in and out of him. It was just, I don't know. I didn't know who he was at the time. It's just felt horrible not knowing who my own brother was at the time. So
at that point, we didn't know what the police had to tell us. We did subsequently find out that he did have another person in the car, that person was his friend Brian, who we knew. The whole thing just kind of blew wide open. It blew wide open. The police, of course, were concerned about the fact that they may have been drinking. Obviously, they were. That this was suddenly a large legal problem, not just a health problem or a threatened life. This was going to be something that was going to take a very, very long time to resolve and to get over. Either one of these boys could have died. Either one of them could have ended up in a coma. Either one of them could have ended up with broken neck. Either one of them could have been driving. It was tragic. It was a tragedy that could have been avoided and should have been avoided in the moment that it took to make one bad decision.
after Chris's accident, I know I wouldn't want to, like, drink and drive, just pretty much. I wouldn't want to get into a car after I had, like, even half a drink. I wouldn't trust it anymore. I wouldn't want a chance with anything like that. And I know a couple of my friends drink, but if I see them drinking, I'll stick with being the designated driver.
It was scary. I mean, the drinking and all that, I mean, it really brought things into perspective because, you know, you're just reckless when you're young. You're drinking, you know, you think you're invincible. When it hits home like that, it opens people's eyes. A lot of people started acting differently when it came to going to parties or making sure that they had a ride. It just really affected people in a very both positive and negative manner, I could say, because it was a horrible thing that happened, but people really did learn from it. And of course, there's still going to be people who are acting stupid and hopping in the car and driving away 3 sheets to the wind, but for the most, I think it really opened a lot of people's eyes around here.
I've experienced it through these accidents as being a first responder on the scene, and when you come up to an accident, is finding young adults involved in accidents and being severely injured or killed. It takes a toll on the officer because it's not something that we really want to see. We don't want to see anybody hurt, but when it's somebody young, a young adult, it takes an effect on you. And then we have to go and notify the families, both the family of the victim and the family of the person that still may be alive at that particular time. And then you get to see how the effects of the crash have on them, whether they lost a loved one, or they have to go through all the medical procedures, or they have to go through the criminal justice system. So both the toll on the person that is the victim of the whole ordeal, as well as the person that may end up being ultimately arrested in the whole ordeal. Everybody's family is affected in it, as well as the law enforcement community. We're out there trying to protect the community from these types of things, and we don't like to see them happen.
Jason, a sophomore, accepted a ride to St. Raymond's High School, yet his school friend chose to speed and drive recklessly, and Jason did not wear a seatbelt.
Jason's story is very sad because that morning what he did was he got up and was going out to school just like he does every morning and walking out of the house to go catch the bus to get to St. Raymond's. And when he said goodbye to his mother, that's what she thought he was doing, was walking out of the house, going up the block, catching the bus, and going to St. Raymond's. But instead, what you might think was fortuitous is an older student who lived on his block was catching a ride with a friend. And they, very generously, again you would think, offered him a ride to school. And his decision to take that ride ended up costing him his life. He didn't know the driver of that car. and the driver of that car drove so dangerously and so recklessly that he crashed and Jason was killed. There wasn't that much time from being picked up to when they crashed. Nothing was going to save Jason from the driver's choices that day. Whether it's alcohol or other impairment or just very, very dangerous driving, the victims in these cases are typically the true innocents, the people who are simply going to school, are simply on their way home from church, or on their way home from a movie or getting ice cream. And when all those choices made by a dangerous driver occur, their lives collide. My 14-year-old son says that I worry too much because of what I see every day. And my response is, what I see is real. This happens, it happens to real people, and it affects their lives forever. Obviously people lose their lives, and the rest of the family has to live with that. And so when he says that to me, I explain, maybe I worry a little bit more because I'm perhaps more familiar with the tragic consequences of quick decisions, poor quick decisions.
Allison Follett was a Cazenovia College freshman, a girl with promise and dreams. She drove home with a classmate who had been drinking. She never saw her sophomore year. At age 7, Katie Flynn was killed on the Meadowbrook Parkway in Long Island, coming home with her parents from her aunt's wedding, where she'd been a flower girl with her sister Grace. Stanley Rabinowitz was their limo driver. He often volunteered to drive people home when they'd had too much to drink. At age 20, Martin had been previously arrested for drunk driving and given a second chance. The charge was dropped to possession of alcohol on campus. He'd been warned by a friend not to drink and drive the week before the crash when he left a party where he was supposed to stay over. This weekend, he drove drunk again. Martin Heidgen was driving his pickup